Hey, what's up guys? Shamrocked here with another dungeon guide for you. This is for Necrotic Wake on a 12, and once again I am using the Farseer hero tree for Restoration Shaman. So before we look at the dungeon, it's going to be a full run, full walkthrough with commentary. I'll just go through some of the important talents for this dungeon. So thankfully there's not a whole lot that you need to take specifically for this place. First, I would advise taking Tremor Totem. It's always good to have just in case of emergency. The Marauder ads are always going to do a fear cast, and if it does not get interrupted, then it's going to fear everybody who's in the circle. So as long as you're standing out of the circle, if anybody gets feared, you can just drop this in a pinch and it will potentially save a wipe, which is really nice. Next, I would mention Purge. Purge is necessary if you're pulling the mini boss Nerzuda, which most routes do right now. You only need one Purge, so if someone else in the group is running this, then you don't need to bother. But it is necessary to get through that mini bosses. Basically, you can't do them without a Purge. Lastly, I also run Seasoned Winds for this dungeon. I don't think you have to for this one, but it really does come in handy for a lot of the shadow damage interrupts. You're just going to take less damage from any shadow damage you get hit after you interrupt, and it does stack. This is an insane DR, by the way. If you can get this stacked up to 2 times for 18 seconds, you're taking 30% less damage for a School of Magic. So this can actually save you. However, it's not absolutely necessary. And what I don't like about Seasoned Winds with Farseer is that you have to, and this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand why they pathed it this way while making the tree. But you do have to go through enhanced imbues, and I actually don't take Earth Living Weapon for Farseer. So if you do, then this talent will have more value to you, but for me it just sucks because I'm spending 2 points to get here. But that being said, Seasoned Winds is a very, very nice defensive. I would not sleep on it. Other than that, going to the right tree, as always, Master of the Elements, really good pick here for decent spot healing. Necrotic Wake is a really hard dungeon for the tank. They need a ton of heals, so Master of the Elements is really going to help with that. I also run Unleash Life for my Ancestor Summoning for the Farseer tree, which I've gone over in my Farseer guide, so if you're interested in that, just check it out. Earthen Harmony, once again, probably a must in this dungeon just because of the amount of damage the tank is taking. And then finally, I also run Ancestral Protection Totem. This is, I really like having this talent. It really comes in handy just for the health increase, for the freebie res, whatever. It does take a while to get used to, but I really think this is an OP talent. But if you're not someone who wants to play Ancestral Protection Totem, I would probably put that point into Earth Living Weapon instead. Just don't take Earthen Wall Totem because as Farseer, that's pretty useless. And then also I take Primordial Wave instead of Downpour here. The only reason you would take Downpour, I think, in this dungeon is to help with the first boss living. But if you're running with a warrior tank, they can basically make the first boss do no damage to anybody with the frontals, which is what you'll see in this run. But other than that, Primordial Wave, I find I get way more use out of an entire dungeon. It doesn't heal a huge amount, but it does. It's a nice Cloudburst filler. It's a good little AoE cleave heal, and it just really lends itself to my playstyle, so that's why I choose that. All right, and then also, this is obvious, but make sure you take Stone Bulwark Totem. You need every defensive you can possibly get in this dungeon. And yeah, so with all of those out of the way, let's take a look at the dungeon and the run itself. So in terms of Farseer versus Totemic, I honestly think that both hero talent trees are very viable for Necrotic Wake. Totemic is going to give you an easier time with the third boss and maybe the second boss as well. But Farseer, in my opinion, is going to be better for literally everything else. Except maybe the first pull. I feel like Totemic is probably better for the first pull, but it's okay. You can get through without it. Okay, so going into this, if possible, you're going to want someone to CC this ad over here so that you can grab the shield. It's going to help you out on the Gatekeeper ads. And then you're going to make your way over to the tank. I advise if you are grabbing the shield, the tank should wait a couple of seconds. We're not in Discord or anything here, so I wasn't able to communicate that, but trust me, it'll help you out. Anyways, for the first Gatekeeper, Wrath of Zolramus or whatever it's called, just pop a Slink down. You'll see someone died there just because I was actually stunned, so I wasn't able to pop it right away. So while these Gatekeeper things are happening, it's very important that people are stunning, interrupting, and doing all that. For the second Wrath that you'll get, likely, depending on how good your DPS is, you'll get at least 2 of them. For the second one, that's when I'll pop the shield that I just picked up. So first one, you're using Slink, and another cooldown, probably Ancestral Guidance, maybe Ascendance, whatever you feel like is better for you. And then second one, you're going to use your shield, and that should be enough. And it should, theoretically, with good DPS, it should die either right before or during that second Wrath, so you shouldn't have to deal with a full one. Okay, and then with this route, we're going to pull the boss next. So the boss is our second pull. However, some groups you'll go and do the other Gatekeeper second. I find it doesn't really matter. Just keep in mind, if you're not running with a warrior tank and you can't really cheese the first boss, which you're going to see here, it's important that you don't go into the first boss if the group doesn't have like any defensives left, because you do need defensives to survive the frontals from the first boss. So yeah, just keep that in mind with your group comp and whatever you're doing. If you go from gatekeeper to gatekeeper and then to boss and nobody has any defensives, it's likely people are going to die. So if that is like sort of what your routing is, I would just add an easy pull in between the boss and the gatekeepers, just to allow people to get their defenses up, because there's lots of stuff in this first area that you can pull, and then you can skip stuff later. But anyway, so for this boss, basically the name of the game with Farseer is just save your Ancestral Swiftness for each frontal, and you'll be able to immediately top up whoever gets hit. Sometimes they'll go down to like 5% health, and so if you have an Ancestral Swiftness healing surge on them, they'll top up pretty easily, which is nice. Other than that, like whenever he does the frontal, it's going to aim the worms at people. So try to always aim them in the back, like aim them towards the stuff that's already on the ground, and then run away quickly. So the worms do a lot of damage if they hit you. All they have to do is get close and they take a chomp out of you. And then I think they do more damage, or they get faster or whatever every time they hit. So it's very important that people avoid getting hit as much as possible. As a Resto Shaman, you have a great kit for this. You have Earthbind Totem, Earth Grab if you're taking it, and you also have your Stun Totem, which is amazing. So just keep using those on cooldown for these little ads that come out. Now, the cheese for this boss, if you're running with a Prot Warrior, is that they can intervene and Spell Reflect every single one, meaning that nobody ever takes any damage, assuming they're doing it correctly, which kind of just makes this boss obsolete, aside from the worm. So you can still die from the worm. So right here, we're really bad positioning. You basically want to kite this boss around the room, but if you get caught in like a corner or a bad spot, it can be really hard to run away from the worms. And like I said, they do a ton of damage. So this rogue here just got chomped by, I think, like 2 of them at the same time. Also, just a disclaimer, the rogue apparently was having some like weak aura errors or something, so you'll see him die quite a bit throughout this dungeon, which is not great. You actually see this dungeon, we time with not a lot of time left, and there is a few deaths, a lot of them very avoidable, most of them due to this little error that the rogue was experiencing. You know, I apologize for that, but other than that, it was a pretty clean run, and thankfully the DPS in this group is pretty big, so we were able to overcome the mistakes that we made. So this boss really is on the tank to sort of path through correctly, especially if you haven't killed a lot of the packs in this area like us. You just have to make sure that you don't accidentally butt pull anything, or I know a lot of DPS like mages and Death Knights have like orbs and Pillar of Frost and whatever that can pull things. So it's just everybody has to be very mindful of where they're standing during this fight. But yeah, that's it. So pretty much if you are running a warrior and you are able to intervene Spell Reflect, that means that you can use your Farseer talents as more of a DPS increase rather than saving them for the healing after people get frontaled. So if that is the case, just feel free to use your Ancestral Swiftness as more of like a chain lightning buffer for your worms if necessary. So you'll see before we pulled that first boss, I actually went and pulled the shield that's over to the left there, and I'm going to use that for this gatekeeper. So what's nice about pulling the boss before this gatekeeper is I'm able to have all of my cooldowns back up. The first boss that we just did is not really a cooldown boss unless like an emergency happens. So you should have Slink or you know, Ascendance or whatever else up. So you can use that for the first Wrath, just like the very first one we pulled. And then the second one, you can use the shield if necessary. Because this group you pull with the Flesh Crafters, which use the Cleaver, which is really nice because the Cleaver will basically kill the Gatekeepers for you. And that is currently the best strat right now. The Gatekeepers give a lot of count, but they do a lot of damage. So if you can Cleaver them down really quickly, you can usually kill them before you get that second Wrath. But if you did get a second Wrath, that would be the perfect opportunity to use that shield. But because we didn't, I get to actually keep the shield, and I believe I use it for I think I use it for this pull here, maybe the mini boss, and then I pick up another shield, and yeah, you'll see, and then I use it for the third boss, which is really nice to have. All right, so this pull here is, once again, one that's a little bit tougher for the tank, so make sure you guys figure out who's interrupting the scream that the Marauders do. That is the fear that's going to fear everybody that's in the circle. But once again, like I said at the beginning, if you take Tremor Totem, you should be able to save the group from a wipe here. Just make sure you're standing far enough back that you don't get feared yourself if it does happen to go off. But once you have a kick assigned to the Marauder, everybody else should just be kicking random bolts. The Bone Mend is also a good one to kick if you can, because it is a pretty substantial heal. One ability that the guys do here, I believe it's the sorcerers, they do something called Final Bargain. It's just going to put like a buff. It's a really weird ability, but it basically puts a buff on one of the ads, and it's going to buff them to full health, but then it's going to kill them like 5 seconds later. So, and it's really cool because it can actually target the Marauders and other like high health mobs and kill them really quickly for you. So it's actually a nice thing to see. So if you see the Final Bargain cast going off, don't interrupt that. Just let that happen because it's actually going to help you in the long run. All right, so for Ner'zhul, this is the mini boss here. Make sure everybody's using kicks. This is a great spot to use one of the orbs that you can pick up. Usually the tank picks up the one that we just passed and then uses it here as it's going to interrupt everything. Other than that, you should be keeping kicks on everything. You can use that for shield if you have any up from the first area to help your tank out here. And then this death burst ability that Ner'zhul does is really annoying just because it happens very quickly. So just make sure you're watching your feet in anticipation of that and that you immediately get into Ghost Wolf and run away if you need to. The other abilities that this guy does, he does Grim Fate, which is just a debuff he puts on someone that explodes after about 5 seconds or so. It does a lot of damage, so make sure you either put Ancestral Vigor on that person or Earth Shield if needed. And then the last thing he does is the Death Shroud, which is why you brought Purge to this dungeon. So when he puts the Death Shroud up, he's going to take basically no damage. And it's also going to, and here it is right here, it's also going to damage everybody quite a bit. So make sure you purge that immediately so that you don't lose any damage on the guy and that you're not taking too much damage yourselves. But all in all, as far as mini bosses go, pretty simple. And then this pull here, we're going to have 2 Marauders and we're going to bring it over to the left to the Necromancer. So for these Necromancer pulls, all you have to do is kill the Necromancer and then all the skeletons will die. So there's actually no point in AoE DPSing here. Like, just don't use, I know it's tempting to use Chain Heal, but don't bother. Just target either the Necromancer or one of the Marauders and just pump single target DPS into there. It's going to help you in the long run. But otherwise for this pull, as long as the tank can handle it, it's pretty easy. Just make sure you have 2 people assigned to kicking the Marauder Scream. Once again, keep your Tremor Totem at the ready just in case and stand far enough back that you don't get feared if one of the screams goes off. That way you can save the group, look like a hero. Otherwise, just interrupt the Frostbolt volleys that the Skeletal Mages do. It's really, you can like stun them, knock them up, whatever, and try to interrupt as many of the Necrotic Bolts that the Necromancer does as well because those really hurt the tank. There's also a spear here, so I picked up the spear. The spear, every single one of the spears is going to be used on the 3rd boss, just because you really want to be able to 1 phase or like 1.5 phase that boss, just for the sake of time, and also because it's a really hard boss to do. But we'll explain that more when we get there. Okay, next we're going to shroud past this Necromancer pack. It's very inefficient to just do this pack alone, and you also don't want to pull things with it, so this is a really good spot to skip. And then we're going to pull all of these packs here. So once again, just like before, you want someone to be assigned a kick on the Marauder. Everybody else should just be kicking random Sorcerer, the Necromancer bolts, Necrotic bolt, whatever it's called, as those really hurt the tank and they put a health absorb on them as well. In addition, the Sorcerers cast something called Shadow Well. It usually does not target you. It usually targets the tank or somebody in melee, but it can target you, so make sure you keep your eyes open. The Shadow Well is very hard to see if you're not paying attention. It can happen very quickly, and it will basically kill you almost immediately if you're standing in it for more than like a second or two. So really make sure you're watching your feet there, and if you're in Discord, make sure you're calling it out and helping your friends, letting them know that the Shadow Well is coming out. But otherwise, once again, pretty standard pull. Just make sure you're kicking whatever you can, getting in DPS as much as you can. And then really the name of the game for this dungeon, the majority of it other than the bosses, is just spam heals into the tank. And that is why I feel like Farseer is so effective for this dungeon. Because it does have the AoE burst healing to get through the bosses, but the spot healing with Farseer is just so incredible. And this is a dungeon where the tank will need as much spot healing as possible. That is until they probably nerf it at some point, but right now, trust me, if you learn how to play Farseer just for this dungeon alone, you're going to be the tank's best friend. Like I guarantee you, if you're able to successfully heal your tank through this dungeon using Farseer and just keeping them healthy, they will probably add you to their friends list because there's not a lot of other healers out there right now that can sustain the amount of spot healing that Farseer can do as quickly as we can do it without spending as much mana, while also being able to heal the bosses, which is one of the reasons why I love Farseer so much. But keep in mind, that's not me picking a favorite. I absolutely love Totemic as well. I really, really do love both of our hero trees. I think they're both so amazing. And it's so cool because they have really different strengths. So here we make kind of a big mistake in the sense that the enhancement shaman dies, and then I get kind of tilted and I stop paying attention and I die just because he doesn't onk. So, good lesson. Like, don't focus on what other people are doing. Don't get tilted. Just, play the game. But yeah, right about now I'm thinking like, holy crap, we're losing like 45 seconds, almost like a minute because this guy's not onking, whatever. And like I said, we weren't in Discord, so it's not like you can communicate any of that, which is, an issue. But this guy should have been dead by now, which is unfortunate. And then here you see me die because I can't see that swirl in time. And then I onk right away because there's no sense in holding it. Keep the group alive. So anyways, after this, we're going to res this guy and we're going to go into the next boss. So the next boss is not hard if you don't make it hard. And what I mean by that is if the group is not interrupting and pulling the ads in and CCing the ads properly or killing them in time, this fight can be a lot harder than if you do it properly. And you probably saw me there about to type something, but I, just thought better of it. I'll tell him after the key. All right, so make sure also there's a spear here. Somebody needs to pick that up. I believe our DK is getting it. And then the boss is going to come down and we're going to start. So right off the bat, if you're playing Farseer, I would say just go ahead and spend your Ancestral Swiftness and your Unleash Life just to get some extra DPS in here. There's not really any healing that happens at first. It's not until after the first ads come out. So for this first set, if you have a DK, they can probably grip the mages in and anything else that's sort of straggling. But that being said, make sure you have figured out, like I said, you should have 3 people basically ready to kick the boss, and they should be rotating on the boss so none of those necrotic bolts get off. And then you should have 2 people who are focusing on the mages in the packs. Ranged kicks are obviously better for the mages, so if you have 2 shamans like we do, the shaman should be focusing the ranged kicks while the melee would focus the boss. The necrotic bolt that the boss does won't one-shot anyone on a 12 necessarily, but it will get them down to like 10% and put a health absorb on them. So if they get like frost bolted, or like if it happens during the AoE that this boss does, then that can be pretty detrimental and it's very easy for someone to die. So it's very important that the group has kicks figured out for this boss. But basically the way this works is every time you kill a set of ads, the boss gets like a stacking buff. And then when he does his like ultimate cast, if any of the ads are still alive, it's a wipe. The group will die 100%. But if all of the ads are dead, he basically consumes his buffs and then just like does basically random AoE damage, like pulsing AoE damage throughout the next phase. So the first phase is extremely easy with the first set of ads because there's no pulsing AoE damage, but every set of ads after that is going to be quite substantial AoE damage. So that's when you want to save your cooldowns for. Because of this fight is pretty short, you could actually probably use 2 cooldowns per phase if you needed to, like maybe pair Ancestral Guidance with Ascendance, just keep everybody nice and healthy, and then you can pair, Healing Tide with Slink, or you can just use them like I am, sort of piecewise. So I think I used AG for the first one, probably Ascendance for the second, then I used Healing Tide, and now I'm just using Spirit Link to help keep the group nice and healthy. And I also know that the boss is going to die after this set, so I'm not too worried about conserving a cooldown for the next set. Otherwise, I probably would have saved Slink there just because I didn't need to use it. It was more of just why not, because I knew we were going to kill this before anything else was needed. Okay, once this boss dies, we're going to take the angel dudes. You just have to click on one and they're going to fly you up to the top. And this is where the orbs you picked up come in handy. So we used 1 orb on the mini boss, Nerzuda, and then we have 2 orbs left. So you get 3 orbs in total, assuming you're doing the route where you get to pick them all up. We're actually going to use the next 2 orbs for this pull here. Also, we have lots of time right now. Like, even though we've had 5 deaths already, 14 minutes is more than enough to finish off this dungeon. We actually, if we had played this clean, we probably would have had like 5 minutes left in the key, which is pretty sad that we didn't get that, because it would have been not just more points, but it's nice to have that on the scoreboard. But honestly, I'm just happy to time this. This is a pretty tough key. Like I said, it's really on the tank though. If you can find a good tank who can take this and you're able to spot heal them, regardless of whether you're using Totemic or Farseer, if you're able to really help keep that tank alive, all you need is your DPS to do DPS, and you will time this key. So for these packs here, we're going to use the orbs right away. And then you really want to interrupt the gore splatter, which is the collector. We actually just missed one there. The gore splatter does a ton of damage. So if that does end up going off, make sure you use a cooldown and then make sure you're using whatever possible CCs you have and interrupts to make sure no other damage goes out while you're taking the gore splatter damage. But if you're playing, like I said, if you're probably playing it like in Discord and you're calling kicks and stuff, that probably will not go off. So thankfully I had a nice cooldown to use there. I had a nice ancestral guidance, and I was able to keep the group healthy, even though we made that mistake. And you'll see, like, for any important casters, I'm actually setting them as my focus. I don't have a focus kick macro, but because I have the focus right in the center of my screen, I can see them when they're going to cast something important, and I can just click them there and kick them. So whether you use a macro or not, it's very important. Or not, not necessarily important, but it's a good skill to have to be able to sort of set something as a focus, just so you can keep an extra eye on it in case you accidentally end up tab targeting something else, or if there's there's a ton going on and you're just like not watching where the bar is normally on your screen. That will just give you, sort of like a safeguard just to see what's happening. All right, we're fighting our last collector pack here. Once again, we learned our lesson from that gore splatter going off. I'm basically now just saving my kick for the gore splatter. Everybody else is kicking everything else. And then these are the big guys that use the tenderize and the other ability to mutilate. They used to be a lot scarier. I remember back in Shadowlands, and even in the beta, they were a lot scarier too. I think they maybe got nerfed a little bit. So your tank should be able to survive them no problem, unless they end up getting like way too many stacks. But that would just be more of a DPS issue, meaning like your DPS are just not able to kill them enough or fast enough. All right, I think we have someone die here. I think, yeah, right there. That was like a fervent or something from having Earth Ellie up. We figured out afterwards. So the rogue just got cleaved by something that he shouldn't have been cleaved by. But it's actually okay. So our rogue was planning to swap out. If you have any DPS that are swapping out to go single target for the third and last boss, the best spot to do it is pretty much right here. When you're getting the two, I believe it's two collectors or crafters or whatever that come out as the next pack. And the reason is because most of the damage to them comes from their own cleavers, as you're about to see. So if anybody is switching, this is probably the spot to do it, because you're going to be able to kill these ads even with even being down a DPS or two. All right, these guys, the stitching assistants. So right away, they're going to target people with the cleavers. It's possible that they both target the same person, which kind of sucks. But if that does happen, all you have to do is run to one side, and then like the tank has to basically intercept one of the cleavers while the other one hits the other assistant, which is nice. But if they target two different people, then you can basically just aim them at each other. Next, you're going to get a morbid fixation. So while the morbid fixation happens, you're also going to get a cleaver. So just make sure you're ready. If you get targeted by both the morbid fixation and the cleaver from the other guys, I find the best strategy is just to run backwards in a straight line, which you're going to see me do on the next one, I believe. And that way the cleaver will hit the guy who's chasing you. Yeah, so you'll see here. So I get targeted by both. I'm just going to aim the guy in front of the cleaver and run backwards in a straight line. He's going to get hit by the cleaver, and then I can just, curve off as needed. And then you'll see actually our enhancement shaman died there. That death 100% was my fault. I thought the throw flesh was going to put him down to like 5% health, but it actually ended up killing him. So that was a miscalculation on my part, and also just, a lesson to not leave things up to chance there. I sort of riptided him twice instead of doing a healing surge, once again, just because I thought it would be enough. But in hindsight, I 100% should have just healing surged him, and he would have lived. All right, so our timer's starting to get a little bit sus, but we're still good here. Just like I said, we actually have really big DPS in this group, so it's not the biggest deal in the world that we're dying a lot. But on a run where you have an AUG, or maybe your DPS just aren't as good, this amount of deaths would break your key, which is really unfortunate. Like I said, a lot of them are just the rogue, because he had like a UI error that was causing him some issues. But even still, yeah, we want to clean it up. You don't want to be this messy, especially with the way 12s work now. Every death, 15 seconds, like, 7 deaths, that's like a few minutes lost already. Not even including the time it takes to run back and the DPS that you lose, if somebody dies in cooldowns or whatever. Which, yeah, if you want to hear me rant about the scaling for plus 12s and why I personally think it's bad for the game, even though personally I actually like the scaling. I think the challenge is really fun. But anyways, yeah, if you want to hear about why I think that's maybe not necessarily great for the Mythic Plus community in general, I do have a video ranting about that, so you can check that out if you're interested. All right, we have our final pack before the boss. This pack is actually by far the hardest for me because we're running with 3 melee, so they're just going to be constantly taking the damage that you take when you stand close to this guy. And I believe we have someone die here as well, and I'm pretty sure it's the rogue. So anyways, he's going to spew disease. I believe if you're standing near him, the spew disease, like standing in the AoE on the ground, doesn't actually do something because it's the same dot that you get from standing by him. So that's just what someone told me. I don't know if that's actually true. So if you're a melee DPS, I'm pretty sure you can stand in that puddle if you're already close to him, just because it won't double up the dot on you. And also apologies, that wasn't the rogue that died, that was the enhanced shaman. So once again, this is really tragic too, because I was hoping that he would target me with the spew disease every time because I'm the only one not taking damage from the AoE. But I mean, sometimes you just get a low roll of the dice and he literally doesn't target me a single time, which is, like I said, unfortunate just because these guys are already taking so much damage. And this is also not great for my mana going into the next boss, but thankfully I do get a second to drink here. And you do kind of want to go into the next boss with everybody topped up, but you know, that's not a luxury I have right now because I do need to get mana. But yeah, once this guy dies, you can basically pull the boss right away. And then this boss, sort of like the penultimate boss for this dungeon, like everything, like it all boils down to this point. This is why you need Lust and your 3 spears to basically kill this guy as fast as possible. There is another way to do this boss, which is like the slow way, in which case you kill the creations, right? So you hook them down, get as much damage as you can, kill the creation, and the next one comes out. But it just takes a lot longer. So this is by far the fastest way to do it, is basically getting him down with that first hook, using all 3 spears on him, and then just like going ham. You'll see this is where I'm also popping cooldowns. So as the longer the creation stays up, the more ramping damage it does. So the AoE damage gets pretty incredible towards the end of it. And then a second creation is also going to come out, and it's just like insane damage. So this is where I think like probably one of the only benefits of playing Totemic in this dungeon is that Totemic would be much better at healing this than Farseer would. Actually, sorry, let me back up. Not much better. I mean, Farseer, as you can see, I'm doing fine right now. But Totemic definitely has an easier time with this. And unfortunately, you know, once you run out of cooldowns, you're kind of sitting there dry, which is right now I'm at the point where I'm out of cooldowns, but thankfully we're about to kill him here. So all I'm thinking in my head is I just need to keep the group alive long enough to kill this guy, which is, you know, hopefully in the next 5 seconds or so. That being said, we did have a death there, which, you know, unfortunate, like I said, just because our timer is running down, not really because it would like cause us to not kill him or anything. But yeah, you saw there, once we killed that first creation that was up, the AoE damage went way down, and that's the only reason we were able to survive that fight, is because he died when he did. So that was a blessing in disguise there. And then finally we have this last boss. This guy's pretty easy. The only thing that can make this boss hard is if the DPS take a long time to kill the shield. The shield that he puts up does ramping AoE damage on everyone. And you can see it on your timers there. It's called Icebound Aegis. So whenever you know that's coming up, if you think that your group doesn't have the DPS to get rid of it right away, which is usually not the first one. The first one is usually going to disappear right away because all of the DPS are up and they're in cooldowns. But if you're ever in the fight and you know one person has been exiled or maybe even 2 people are not on the platform, that is a good point to pop defensives and 3-put cooldowns, just so you can heal through that shield. All right, so for the frozen binds, it's going to target somebody that you need to dispel. Just make sure that everybody is out of the circle when you do dispel it, because if anyone is in there, they're actually going to get the frozen bind debuff as well, and then your dispel is going to be on cooldown, and it actually does quite a bit of damage if you don't dispel it right away. So yeah, just make sure people are out before you do that dispel. And unfortunately, that's one of the only things in this dungeon where people can blame you if you mess it up. So just make sure you're paying attention there. All right, so here's a good example. We have a shield right now, and we only have 3 people on the platform. So I popped my Ancestral Swiftness there, and that was enough to keep the group alive. But had we started to take even more ticks, I probably would have gone with the Ancestral Guidance, Healing Tide, or Ascendance there. And keep in mind, this is also like you want to save Spirit Walker's Grace once again for one of those moments. Like if you see a shield coming up and it's not dying right away, and then you get the Comet Storm, which is this thing where you need to sort of run and dodge these circles that go on the ground. They basically follow you. That's a great spot to use Spirit Walker's Grace. All right, so our timer, once again, really tight, but it's definitely doable. Like we're cranking this boss right now. What's also nice is if you have really good DPS, they're able to sort of save their cooldowns and plan around getting exiled. Because once you come up from the exile, I believe you get a 100% crit buff, which is pretty crazy. Also, you'll see our rogue died there to something completely avoidable, which is tragic because, like I said, our timer is running down. Thankfully, we still get it. But yeah, so he died. And sorry, I say it's tragic, but that doesn't mean it's not hard. When you're running this boss with all melee DPS, it's a little bit hard for them to coordinate the Comet Storm. They basically have to run together, otherwise they can kill each other. So that's kind of just what happened there with that rogue. But yeah, you'll see here, sketchy shield, so I'm just popping some cooldowns here. I think I popped Healing Tide, and then I'm also watching for my Ancestral Swiftness. I'm also trying, because our timer is kind of tight here, I'm trying to get as much DPS in as possible. So I am using some of my Farseer abilities, Unleash Life and Ancestral Swiftness, and I'm spending globals on DPS that I could be doing for healing, or that I could be using on healing. So keep that in mind. If your timer is like not as tight as this one, you probably want to focus more on just keeping everybody alive rather than squeezing out every DPS global like I am here. Because, you know, the safer your DPS feel, the more DPS they're going to do, and they're in less danger of dying. But desperate times, unfortunately, call for desperate measures, and that's why you see me spending a lot of globals on this fight, DPSing, instead of just trying to keep everyone topped up the entire time. All right, so we're actually looking really good here. We have 18%, 46 seconds. As long as no one dies, we should be good. So that's basically what my internal monologue going through this right now is, you know, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die. Especially because this dungeon is pretty grueling. Like I said, I know it's more of a tank dungeon, but it's also really a healer dungeon, just because the second and third bosses do a lot of AoE damage. But more importantly, like even for a good tank, and trust me, this tank right here is very, very good, you just have to crank so much healing into them the whole time. And once again, that's why I really just advocate for Farseer as the better tree for this dungeon. Like I said, I think both are completely viable, but as long as you can learn how to play the burst AoE healing for Farseer, as long as you can do that properly and heal through those bosses, then you're totally fine. And it's being Farseer is just gonna help immensely with the spot healing you need to do for the tanks. But that being said, I mean, the people doing the top keys are all playing totemic even for this dungeon. So, you know, it's not to say it's not doable as totemic. It's completely viable. In fact, the evidence shows that totemic is the better tree across Mythic Plus in general for the people pushing the top keys. And I don't necessarily think that's because Farseer can't do it. I just think that totemic is a little bit easier, and it's just what most people are used to playing. But as you can see, Farseer, no issues here. I mean, all of those deaths, except for maybe the one where the Throw Flesh got the guy and I should have done a Healing Surge instead of a Riptide, but all of those deaths were due to silly mistakes and mechanical issues. Nothing was due to lack of healing that, you know, totemic would have over Farseer, which is really nice. Okay, so that's a Necrotic Wake on a 12 as Farseer. I hope this guide helped you out. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will see you in the next guide. Thanks, everyone.